It's May 2nd here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with a resignation of South Korea's acting Prime Minister and Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok before Parliament was about to vote on a motion to impeach him. With Choi stepping down, Deputy Prime Minister and Education Minister Lee Jae-myung will take on the role of acting president as of midnight Thursday. He replaces outgoing acting president and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who filed his resignation on Thursday and is declaring his run for the June presidential election on Friday morning. The Supreme Court on Thursday overturned a lower court's acquittal of Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung on election law violation charges. According to the top court, remarks made by Lee in 2021 constitute the dissemination of false information under the election law. South Korean and U.S. trade officials held their two-day technical discussions on bilateral trade issues on Thursday, aiming to outline the framework of future full-scale talks. South Korea is now led by Deputy Prime Minister for Social Affairs and Education Minister Lee Jae-myung, a fourth in line to the presidency. This comes as a Deputy Prime Minister for Finance, Choi Sang-mok, was initially set to take over again as a caretaker, but stepped down after the Democratic Party moved to impeach him. Let's bring in our Kim Do-yeon, live from the National Assembly. Do-yeon, walk us through what happened.
Tommy, tensions flared at the National Assembly last night as the Democratic Party pushed an impeachment motion against Choi Sang-mok just hours before he was to assume caretaker duties. The DP abruptly changed the plenary agenda, bringing an idle bill to a vote right after Prime Minister Han Duck-soo's resignation. Choi, who had been present at the plenary session for a vote on the supplementary budget, walked out as the impeachment motion was read and submitted his resignation to then-acting President Han, who accepted, effectively halting the vote. The DP accused Choi of being complicit in the alleged insurrection tied to former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law declaration, among other unconstitutional acts. In protest, People Power Party lawmakers walked out, calling it political retaliation for the Supreme Court's ruling on DP presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung earlier in the day. Now, for the first time in South Korean history, the Deputy Prime Minister for Social Affairs is serving as acting president. New acting president Lee Jae-myung began Friday with an emergency National Security Council meeting, vowing to keep security tight. Here's also what he said upon entering office for the first time.
I feel a great sense of responsibility. With the election just a month away, my top priority is ensuring a fair process.
Now, Do-yeon, this all stems from a former acting president and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo resigning to run for the presidency earlier yesterday. Now, I believe at the moment he is at the National Assembly to declare his presidency. Now, catch us up with this.
That's right. I mean, the former acting president and prime minister, as you said, is currently giving his declaration speech for his candidacy for the presidency here at the National Assembly. This comes as at 4 p.m. yesterday, then acting President Han, as anticipated, said he will resign effective as of midnight. First, take a listen to what he had to say yesterday.
To help overcome the crisis we face, I've decided to step down and do what I can and must do.
Following the impeachment and removal of former President Yoon Suk-yeol, Han Duck-soo has been the nation's interim leader. While he was impeached himself by the National Assembly, the Constitutional Court restored him to his duties just 39 days ago. But his move to run for president was widely expected, with some People Power Party lawmakers calling him to run, and recent polling showing him ahead of some of other conservative leaders favored for the next presidency, though still behind DP's Lee Jae-myung. Tommy?
All right, Do-yeon, do keep us posted, please. Thank you for that report. And on Thursday, the Supreme Court struck down a lower court's acquittal of Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung on charges of election law violation, sending the case back to the appeals court with just about a month left until the snap presidential election. Our correspondent Arirang reports.
The Supreme Court has sent the election law violation case of Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung back to the High Court. The top court was split 10-2. It had a full bench oversee the case and reviewed it at an unusual fast pace ahead of the upcoming presidential election. Thursday's ruling follows an appeal by prosecutors against a high court ruling in March that had overturned an initial guilty verdict by a local court. In the initial verdict by Seoul Central District Court in November, it was convicted of making false statements in 2021 leading up to the presidential campaign in the following year. The Supreme Court on Thursday also provided guidelines for determining which statements by candidates are considered false. Regarding the meaning of expressions, the court emphasized that it should be interpreted from the perspective of the general voter, not the candidate or the court itself. When judging false facts, it emphasized that it's important to consider whether the statement is minor and doesn't affect voters' judgment, or if it's significant enough to mislead them. In this regard, the court ruled that e-statements are considered as spreading false information under Public Official Election Act. Lee Jae-myung did not appear in court on Thursday as defendants are not required to be present. He said the ruling is completely different from what he believed.
The ruling is completely different from what I thought. The law is an agreement by the people, and the will of the people is what matters most.
The DP criticized the ruling, calling it clearly political and rushed, and accused the court of unfairly interfering in the presidential election. On the other hand, the People Power Party welcomed the ruling, called for Lee's resignation, and urged the DP to nominate a new candidate.
The Supreme Court confirmed that Lee distorted public judgment by spreading false information. That alone disqualifies him as a presidential candidate. Stepping down is just common sense.
Lee will now face a retrial at the Seoul High Court. Since the court must follow the Supreme Court's decision, he is expected to be found guilty. The court is expected to hold a sentencing hearing to decide Lee's sentence. Thursday's ruling drew much attention as it could have affected presidential frontrunner Lee's eligibility to run in the upcoming election. With the case sent back for a retrial, his candidacy remains unaffected since a final ruling has yet to be made. However, if he is elected before the ruling, it could spark controversy over whether the trial should be paused during his term. If the ruling comes before the election, and if Lee receives a fine of 1 million Korean won, about $700 or more, he would be barred from running for elections for 5 years, including the June 3rd election. If sentenced to a prison term, the ban extends to 10 years. 신하영, Arirang News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says a landmark minerals deal with the U.S. offers equal benefits for both sides. Now, Russia is yet to make a official comment on the deal. Ian-jin has the details.
After months of negotiations, the U.S. and Ukraine have signed a minerals deal. Ukraine's cabinet of ministers released the final agreement on Thursday, which was signed the day before. Ukrainian officials said it is far more beneficial to Ukraine than previous versions, which were viewed by many to be exploitative. Promoted by U.S. President Donald Trump, the deal gives the United States preferential access to Ukrainian minerals, including rare earth elements, while setting up an investment fund that will contribute to Ukraine's reconstruction.
It's important to say what it's not, because early on there were some agreements put under the nose of the Ukrainians that pretty much took away their sovereignty, if you will, over their minerals and this type of thing. It was a bit of an extortion that looked like that for a lot of people. And so the Ukrainians pushed back, and Zelenskyy pushed back.
The agreement does not provide for any debt obligations, meaning Washington may have made a concession on Trump's demand that Ukraine pay back the $350 billion of aid that he claims has been provided by the U.S. during the war. Though the agreement doesn't provide concrete security guarantees to Ukraine, it does affirm a long-term strategic alignment between the two countries and a tangible demonstration of the United States of America's support for Ukraine's security, prosperity, reconstruction, and integration into global economic frameworks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said the deal was truly historic.
The agreement has changed significantly during the preparation process. It is now truly an equitable agreement, one that creates opportunities for substantial investment in Ukraine. The agreement does not recognize any debt, and a fund is being set up, a reconstruction fund that will invest in Ukraine and generate returns here.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin has remained silent on the agreement, but former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said Trump had broken the Kiev regime because Ukraine would have to pay for U.S. military aid with mineral resources, which he called national wealth of a disappearing country. And a former Kremlin advisor suggested that the deal has made it harder for the war to end through peace talks. Since the signing of the deal, authorities have reported that a Ukrainian drone attack has killed at least 7 people in the Kherson region, and a Russian drone attack on Odessa has killed 2 people. The Ukrainian parliament still needs to ratify the latest agreement for it to come into effect. It could be voted on during parliamentary sessions between May 13th and 15th if all procedures can be completed in time. 이은진, Arirang News.
So according to the U.S. and Ukraine, their minerals deal is fair for both sides in a way that will supposedly tighten their cooperation and partnership. Will the latest deal also speed up ceasefire negotiations for Russia's war on Ukraine? Let's turn to Professor Andrew Miller for more. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Well, I have to ask, how did the two leaders of the U.S. and Ukraine manage to come to an agreement after their dramatic spat that we all know back in February?
Well, you're correct. Back in February, with this big spat in the Oval Office, it looked like this agreement possibly wasn't going to happen. President Zelenskyy, he stood his ground, and I think maybe that was a very good move by Zelenskyy at the time. But we should also remember this agreement, this deal, this is not a brand new one. This is something that Zelenskyy has been talking about, promoting for the past 6 months or more. So it's definitely been in the works for a long time. The spat in the Oval Office, maybe we could say was a little bump in the road. But in the end, this is a deal that has been in the making for about 6 months. And right now, with the U.S. trade war and Donald Trump maybe sort of isolate China, maybe he's looking to find access to other rare earths in other countries. So this is maybe seen as more of a win-win situation.
So maybe it was going to be a deal that was going to happen eventually, but it did take some time. Right. Now, I know Zelenskyy said this himself, it's a solid deal for Ukraine, but is it really a deal that works in favor of Ukraine?
Oh, I think definitely this is, for the Ukrainian side, a pretty decent agreement. Obviously, it's not 100% perfect. We saw the Americans saying that at the last minute, Ukraine was still trying to make some small adjustments to the agreement. So there's obviously a few things that they're not fully happy with. However, on the whole, for Ukraine, this is pretty good. As you said in the report there, there's no demand, there's no obligation for Ukraine to repay the military aid they've already received. On the other hand, it does guarantee that the Americans will have some sort of presence in Ukraine long term. And as Donald Trump said, this will keep the bad actors out of the country. He didn't specify who those bad actors were, but we can assume he's talking about Russia. And so with this U.S. sort of guaranteed presence in Ukraine, military or civilian, doesn't matter, this means that the U.S. connection will maintain quite a good relationship with Ukraine going forward.
Well, Professor Miller, you said it, the deal is not 100% perfect, but we do have to talk about the security guarantees that Ukraine has long sought. Why is that not explicitly included in the agreement?
So this one, again, if we go back to what Donald Trump has been saying right from day one, Donald Trump and the American government right now, their policy is that this conflict is not a U.S. conflict. This is a Ukraine-Russia conflict. And Donald Trump, he's been very clear, the U.S. should not be militarily involved. And so it's no surprise that there's no security guarantee from America in this agreement.
So the U.S.'s support, military support for Ukraine will be another topic that we're going to have to go over in the future with you, Professor Miller. What's notable about this statement is that the U.S. officially acknowledged Russia's invasion of Ukraine, something the U.S. had long been reluctant to acknowledge. Why the mention now?
So this one here, it's not entirely, but what I would say is that we'd have to look here more at the U.S. domestic So what you'll find is a lot of politics around the world, when it comes to foreign policy, often leaders, if they're having domestic issues, and right now in America, Donald Trump, his approval ratings have gone down quite a bit. The economy, it's not doing that well. So figures are the American economy is going down. He's having immigration issues with deporting those illegal aliens, as he calls them. And so maybe you could argue that right now, Donald Trump and the American government is trying to deflect some of this tension away from domestic issues to an issue where they know if they can have a positive effect and bringing about a possible ceasefire in Ukraine, this will really boost his approval rating.
Well, Professor Miller, then the ultimate question is, will the minerals deal inked between the two sides be any blow to Russia, because Russia hasn't commented on the deal yet, and will the deal speed up ceasefire negotiations?
So in terms of speeding up ceasefire negotiations, this is definitely, it's not going to harm any process there. I don't think it's going to have a huge change in the momentum. For the Russian side, I think they'll probably be a little bit disappointed at this, because if you look back for a couple of months, generally Donald Trump, U.S., has sort of favored Russia. So if you remember a couple of months ago in the UN Security Council with that resolution, historically, America siding with Russia. So it seemed for the past 2 or 3 months that America, Donald Trump has been very much more pro-Russia rather than pro-Ukraine. And so with this new agreement being signed, suddenly here we're now seeing quite a big U-turn, a big shift in the policy towards Russia. So there could be some disappointment from
Well, let's see how Russia reacts to the deal. Professor Miller, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. As always, we appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
South Korean industry ministry officials and their U.S. counterparts have wrapped up their first working-level technical discussion, which follows the 2+2 trade talks held last week. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
South Korean and U.S. trade officials concluded 2 days of technical discussions on bilateral trade issues on Thursday local time. The discussions, which were held in Washington, marks the first working-level meeting between the South Korean delegation led by Chang Sung-gil, the Director General for Trade Policy at the Industry Ministry, and their U.S. trade representative counterparts. While the details of the discussions were not disclosed, one source said the meeting aimed to outline a framework for future full-scale talks. The meeting comes on the heels of last week's so-called 2+2 trade negotiations between Industry Minister An Deok-gun and then Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Representative Jameson Greer. During the high-level talks, the two sides agreed to create a trade package aimed at securing tariff exemptions by July 8, the day that a 90-day pause in tariffs set by U.S. President Donald Trump is set to expire. And South Korea is not the only Asian country that the U.S. is holding trade talks with. The second round of tariff negotiations between the U.S. and Japan kicked off on Thursday local time in Washington between Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and his Japanese counterpart, Economic Revitalization Minister Rosai Akazawa. Bessent emphasized the Trump administration's focus on countries in Asia during an interview on Thursday.
I am concentrating on our Asian trading partners. So we're meeting with the Japanese delegation today. We've had some very good meetings with Korea. So, we are moving quickly.
He also said that trade deals with other Asian countries may take place before China. White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy Stephen Miller maintained a firm stance on China during a briefing on Thursday, saying that the U.S. will not tolerate intellectual property theft or mounting trade deficits. He also said the trade deficit in auto trade between the U.S. and South Korea, Japan, and the European Union was, quote, unsustainable under fair trade conditions. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Consumer prices here have been showing an increase in the 2% range over the past 4 months. According to data from Statistics Korea on Friday, consumer prices in April increased 2.1% year-on-year. The depreciation of the Korean won triggered price increases in processed foods and the cost of dining out. And notably, prices of processed foods rose by 4.1% year-on-year. And prices of dining out went up by 3.2%. In the meantime, the prices of fresh produce fell by 1.9%, marking the largest drop since March 2022.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and this is The World Now. U.S. President Donald Trump has removed National Security Advisor Mike Waltz following a security breach and named Secretary of State Marco Rubio his interim replacement. As part of the reshuffle, Trump has nominated Waltz as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. President Trump's decision was announced on Thursday local time. This comes after Waltz mistakenly added journalist Jeffrey Goldberg to a group chat of top officials discussing classified U.S. military operations in Yemen. While an internal review concluded the breach was accidental, the incident intensified tensions between Waltz and other officials over his hawkish foreign policy views. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been appointed as acting national security advisor, adding to his current roles as Secretary of State, acting administrator for the United States Agency for International Development, and U.S. archivist. The Senate must now confirm Waltz's nomination as UN ambassador. A fourth round of nuclear negotiations between the United States and Iran, initially scheduled for Saturday, May 3rd in Rome, has been postponed for logistical reasons. On Thursday, Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi announced the postponement of the planned talks on the social media platform X, stating the meeting would be rescheduled for logistical reasons. He emphasized that new dates would be announced once they are mutually agreed upon by all parties involved. Iranian officials, however, suggest that the delay reflects deeper issues. They indicated that the next round of talks depends on the U.S. approach, criticizing Washington's recent sanctions on 7 entities involved in the trade of Iranian oil products, calling them unhelpful to diplomatic efforts. The U.S. maintains that it had not confirmed the initial Saturday meeting in Rome, but expects further discussions in the near future. Parts of Northwest Europe are experiencing an unprecedented heat wave, with multiple countries recording their highest temperatures at the start of May. The United Kingdom saw its hottest start to May since records began on Thursday, with temperatures reaching 29.3 degrees Celsius at Kew Gardens in London, according to the Met Office. This surpasses the previous record of 27.4 degrees Celsius set in 1990. Elsewhere in Europe, cities including Paris and Berlin have also experienced unseasonably warm weather, with temperatures reaching 29 and 27 degrees Celsius respectively. The early onset of such high temperatures raises concerns about the frequency and intensity of future heat waves in the region. In Brazil, Sister Ina Canabahu Lucas, recognized as the world's oldest person, has died at the age of 116. Sister Ina passed away on April 30th in Porto Alegre due to natural causes. Born in 1908, Lucas became a Catholic nun in her early 20s and devoted her life to religious service and teaching. She joined the Teresian Sisters religious community in 1927 and spent decades educating students. Sister Ina was blessed by the late Pope Francis in 2018. She attributed her longevity to her faith, saying that he is the secret of life. With her passing, 115-year-old Ethel Caterham in England now holds the title of oldest living person.
We had some rain across the country yesterday, which helped to ease the dry conditions in many parts. However, the eastern parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeongsang-do provinces did not see much rainfall. So the dry weather advisory remains in place for the east of Gangwon-do, and there are wind advisories for the east coast. So please continue to be very careful to avoid accidentally causing any wildfires. And it's a cooler start compared to yesterday under bright skies. And by the afternoon, we'll see things warm up, with Seoul reaching 20 degrees, Daejeon, Gwangju, Chuncheon topping out at 21 degrees. But more clouds could be rolling in over the upper regions this afternoon. Looking ahead to the long holiday weekend, we have frequent chances of rain. We're expecting rain across the country again tomorrow. Saturday, the amounts will be between 5 and 20 millimeters. And sorry to disappoint you, we also have rain in the forecast for various parts of the country on Children's Day and on Tuesday. So please keep an umbrella handy during the holiday.
That is all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.